Good evening, I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we're diving deep into the dirty underbelly of America's energy sector, where corporate profits flow as freely as the contaminated groundwater destroying communities across Oklahoma.
And I'm Maya Clarity. We've got 5 stories tonight that connect in ways the industry doesn't want you to see. From poisoned aquifers in the heartland to a catastrophic mine collapse in Africa that killed over 200 people mining minerals for your smartphone, we're following the money and exposing who's really paying the price for cheap energy.
We're also looking at how one state that likes to call itself green is actually dead last in renewable energy growth, and we'll hear from a Project 2025 architect who's openly declaring war on the clean energy transition. Buckle up, because this is Truth Report, and we don't pull punches.
Let's start in Oklahoma, where ProPublica has uncovered a legislative battle that could finally force oil and gas companies to stop treating the state's groundwater like their personal toxic waste dump.
According to ProPublica's investigation, Oklahoma lawmakers are introducing new bills aimed at reining in the pollution caused by injection wells, those deep underground disposal sites where the oil and gas industry pumps millions of gallons of toxic wastewater. For decades, these companies have operated with virtually no accountability while contaminating the aquifers that rural Oklahomans depend on for drinking water.
And we're not talking about minor contamination here, Alex. The reporting shows systematic pollution of groundwater resources that communities rely on, while oil companies have essentially written their own rules about cleanup responsibility. The new legislation would establish stricter regulations and, crucially, create actual enforcement mechanisms with real consequences.
Here's what's infuriating about this situation. Oklahoma has known about this problem for years. The state's Corporation Commission, which is supposed to regulate the oil and gas industry, has been captured by the very interests it's meant to oversee. ProPublica found that cleanup requirements have been essentially optional, with companies facing minimal penalties even when contamination is proven.
The economics here are straightforward and damning. It costs oil companies a fraction of proper disposal costs to inject wastewater into these wells. They externalize the true costs onto communities, onto farmers whose livestock can't drink the water, onto families who discover their wells are poisoned, onto future generations who inherit a degraded water table.
What's particularly striking about this legislation is who's opposing it. The Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association has already come out swinging, arguing that new regulations would drive business out of the state. It's the same playbook we've seen for 50 years, the threat of economic abandonment used as a shield against any form of accountability.
But here's the calculation these companies don't want you to make. The cost of cleaning up contaminated groundwater, when it's even possible, runs into the hundreds of millions of dollars. The cost of providing alternative water sources to affected communities, that's an ongoing expense that never ends. Who pays those costs? Not the oil companies. Taxpayers and residents do.
The bills being introduced would require companies to post bonds before drilling, ensuring money is available for cleanup if, or more accurately when, contamination occurs. They'd also strengthen the state's ability to hold parent companies responsible when subsidiaries declare bankruptcy to avoid cleanup obligations, a tactic we've seen used repeatedly across the industry.
And Alex, this connects to a broader pattern we're seeing nationwide. The oil and gas industry has perfected a business model that privatizes profits while socializing environmental destruction. Oklahoma's groundwater crisis isn't an accident or an unforeseeable consequence. It's a predictable outcome of regulatory capture and political corruption.
We'll be watching these bills closely. If Oklahoma can break the industry's stranglehold on its own regulators, it could provide a model for other oil-producing states. But given the political realities on the ground, that's a significant if.
Speaking of states that should know better, let's turn to Washington, where ProPublica's earlier reporting revealed something shocking. The state that prides itself on environmental leadership ranks dead last in the nation for green energy growth.
You heard that right. Washington state, home to some of the country's most progressive environmental policies, has fallen behind every other state in actually building new renewable energy capacity. According to ProPublica, the state is now working to speed things up after their investigation exposed this embarrassing reality.
The culprit, as with so many infrastructure failures, is the electrical grid itself. Washington's transmission system simply cannot handle the new solar and wind projects that developers want to build. Projects have been stuck in connection queues for years, some for more than a decade, waiting for grid upgrades that never materialize.
ProPublica reports that the state is now taking action to address these bottlenecks, but the delays have been staggering. While other states, including some with far less progressive reputations, have been rapidly expanding their renewable capacity, Washington has been standing still. The irony is painful for a state that talks so much about climate leadership.
And let's be clear about what this means in practical terms. Every year of delay in building renewable energy is another year of burning fossil fuels. Another year of carbon emissions. Another year of the climate crisis getting worse. Washington's grid problems aren't just a bureaucratic headache, they're contributing to a planetary emergency.
The utilities bear significant responsibility here. For years, they've underinvested in transmission infrastructure while collecting steady returns from ratepayers. The model doesn't incentivize forward-thinking investment in grid capacity, it rewards maintaining the status quo while collecting guaranteed profits.
What's encouraging about ProPublica's follow-up reporting is that the state seems to be taking the criticism seriously. Officials are exploring ways to fast-track grid upgrades, streamline permitting processes, and prioritize projects that can come online quickly. But we've heard promises before.
The question is whether Washington will actually follow through or whether this is another round of press releases and task forces that lead nowhere. The state's climate goals are legally binding now, which should provide some accountability, but meeting those goals requires action, not aspirations.
And this brings us to someone who has no aspirations for clean energy whatsoever. Diana Furchtgottroth, one of the leading authors of Project 2025, gave an interview to Der Spiegel that lays bare the ideology driving the current administration's energy policy.
According to Der Spiegel's reporting, Furchtgottroth, who works with the Heritage Foundation, made her position crystal clear, and I'm quoting here, "We won't let anyone stop us from using our oil and gas." That's not a policy position. That's a declaration of ideological warfare against the energy transition.
Furchtgottroth told the German outlet that she's not a fan of electric cars or solar energy, but she does like coal. In 2026, a senior policy architect is openly championing the dirtiest fossil fuel on the planet while dismissing the technologies that could actually address climate change.
This interview is revealing because it strips away the pretense. The administration's energy policy isn't about energy independence or economic competitiveness or any of the talking points you hear. It's about ideology. It's about a worldview that sees fossil fuel extraction as a cultural value to be defended, not an industry to be managed.
Der Spiegel's reporters pressed Furchtgottroth on the climate implications of this approach, and her responses were telling. The Heritage Foundation strategist essentially dismissed climate concerns as obstacles to be overcome, not scientific realities to be addressed. This is who's shaping American energy policy right now.
What's particularly dangerous about this mindset is how it's being institutionalized through Project 2025. This isn't just rhetoric, it's a detailed blueprint for dismantling environmental regulations, gutting the EPA's authority, and locking in fossil fuel dependency for decades to come.
And the international implications are significant. The United States is the world's largest oil and gas producer. Our policy choices reverberate globally. When a Project 2025 architect tells a European newspaper that nothing will stop American fossil fuel extraction, she's sending a message to the entire world about where this country stands on climate.
The Der Spiegel interview also touched on the economic arguments for fossil fuels, the familiar claims about jobs and energy costs. But what these arguments always omit are the externalities, the health costs of air pollution, the infrastructure damage from extreme weather, the agricultural losses from drought, the human toll of climate disasters.
When you account for those costs, the economics of fossil fuels look very different. But accounting for those costs isn't part of the Project 2025 agenda. The plan is to drill, extract, and burn while someone else pays the price.
Now, speaking of someone else paying the price, we need to talk about what happened this week in the Democratic Republic of Congo. More than 200 people are dead after a collapse at the Rubaya coltan mine, according to reporting from The Guardian.
This is a tragedy that connects directly to every person watching this broadcast. Rubaya produces about 15% of the world's coltan, which is processed into tantalum, a heat-resistant metal that's essential for mobile phones, laptops, and virtually every piece of electronic equipment in the modern world.
Let that sink in. Over 200 people, and The Guardian reports the number could still rise, died mining a mineral that's probably in the device you're watching this on right now. This isn't an abstract supply chain issue. This is blood on our hands.
The Guardian's reporting indicates that Lumumba Kambra Muisa, a spokesperson for the rebel-appointed governor of North Kivu province, confirmed the death toll. And that phrase, rebel-appointed governor, tells you everything you need to know about the chaos that surrounds this critical resource extraction.
Eastern DRC has been destabilized for decades by conflicts driven largely by competition for mineral resources. Armed groups, some backed by neighboring countries, fight for control of mines that feed the global tech supply chain. The coltan in your smartphone may well have passed through the hands of militias.
The Rubaya mine collapse exposes the human cost of this system with brutal clarity. These weren't workers with safety equipment and labor protections. These were people, many of them desperately poor, working in conditions that major tech companies have long known about and have done far too little to address.
The tech industry has supply chain transparency initiatives, conflict mineral policies, corporate responsibility statements. After a disaster like this, you'll hear expressions of concern and promises to investigate. But the fundamental dynamics don't change because changing them would cost money.
It's cheaper to source minerals from dangerous, unregulated mines in conflict zones than to invest in mining operations with proper safety standards. It's cheaper to issue press releases about ethical sourcing than to actually trace every gram of tantalum back to its origin. The market incentives all point toward looking away.
And here's where this story connects to everything else we've discussed tonight. Whether it's Oklahoma groundwater, Washington's grid, or Congolese mines, the pattern is the same: extract value, externalize costs, and let communities bear the consequences.
The families of those 200-plus miners in Rubaya will receive no compensation from Apple or Samsung or any of the companies whose products depend on coltan. The aquifer contamination in Oklahoma will be cleaned up by taxpayers, not Exxon. The climate costs of fossil fuel expansion will be paid by everyone except the people who profit from it.
Now, before we connect all these dots, we need to address one more story that might seem like an outlier but actually fits the pattern perfectly. Bellingcat has published an important investigation into the less lethal weapons being used by DHS agents during immigration raids and against protesters.
This might seem like a different topic, but stay with me. Bellingcat's Guide to Less Lethal Weapons documents the tools being deployed against civilians on American soil: impact projectiles, tear gas, pepper spray. These weapons are called less lethal, but that framing obscures a more complicated reality.
According to Bellingcat's reporting, the use of these weapons has been controversial precisely because less lethal doesn't mean non-lethal. People have been seriously injured, permanently disabled, and yes, killed by weapons in this category. The label itself is a kind of propaganda.
Bellingcat notes that federal agents have frequently used these weapons since the administration's immigration raids began. The organization, known for its rigorous open-source investigations, has compiled detailed information to help the public identify what's being used against them.
So why are we including this in an energy-focused broadcast? Because the same power structures we've been discussing, the ones that let oil companies poison groundwater and tech companies ignore mine collapses, are the ones deploying force against people who protest.
When communities in Oklahoma organize against injection well pollution, they face well-funded industry opposition backed by state power. When activists challenge fossil fuel infrastructure, they encounter militarized law enforcement. The connection isn't abstract, it's the same system protecting the same interests.
Bellingcat's work helps level the playing field by giving citizens information. When you can identify the specific weapon that just hit you, you can document it, report it, and hold agencies accountable. Knowledge is a form of protection.
And that's really what all of tonight's stories have in common. Whether it's ProPublica investigating Oklahoma's groundwater crisis, Der Spiegel interviewing Project 2025 architects, or Bellingcat documenting police weapons, journalism is one of the few tools we have to expose these systems.
So let's pull back and look at the full picture. We've covered 5 stories tonight, and they paint a coherent portrait of how power operates in the 21st century.
In Oklahoma, the oil and gas industry has captured state regulators so thoroughly that they can poison aquifers with impunity. The new legislation represents a potential crack in that wall, but the industry is already mobilizing to defeat it.
In Washington, even progressive states fail to deliver on their climate promises because the infrastructure is controlled by utilities that have no incentive to change. Grid bottlenecks aren't accidents, they're the result of deliberate underinvestment.
At the federal level, Project 2025 architects are openly declaring their intention to lock in fossil fuel dependency regardless of climate science. Diana Furchtgott-Rotha's interview with Der Spiegel removes any doubt about the ideology driving energy policy.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, over 200 miners died extracting minerals for our electronics, another link in a supply chain designed to hide the human cost of consumption from comfortable consumers in wealthy countries.
And across the country, federal agents equipped with less lethal weapons stand ready to suppress dissent when communities try to challenge these arrangements.
The common thread is this: the costs of our economic system are systematically shifted onto people who lack the power to refuse them. Rural Oklahomans drink contaminated water. Congolese miners die in collapses. Future generations inherit a destabilized climate. And anyone who objects too loudly faces the business end of a pepperball launcher.
This is what investigative journalism exists to expose. Not because journalists are activists, but because democracy requires an informed public. You can't hold power accountable if you don't know how it operates.
The corporations destroying Oklahoma's groundwater are counting on you not to pay attention. The tech companies whose supply chains pass through conflict zones are counting on you not to ask questions. The ideologues dismantling climate policy are counting on you to feel helpless.
They're wrong. Every piece of reporting we've discussed tonight represents someone refusing to look away. ProPublica's investigators in Oklahoma. Der Spiegel's correspondents in Washington. The Guardian's journalists covering the DRC. Bellingcat's analysts documenting what power looks like when it shows its face.
And you, watching this broadcast, reading these reports, sharing them with others. That's how accountability happens. Not through grand gestures, but through the persistent, unglamorous work of paying attention.
We started tonight talking about Oklahoma's groundwater. Let's end by acknowledging that water is the most fundamental resource. You can live without oil. You can live without tantalum. You cannot live without clean water. When we let corporations poison aquifers for profit, we're not just making an environmental mistake. We're making a civilizational choice.
The same goes for climate. The energy transition Diana Furchtgott-Rotha wants to block isn't optional. The physics of atmospheric carbon don't care about Heritage Foundation position papers. We either manage this transition deliberately or we suffer through it chaotically.
And the deaths in Rubaya remind us that every consumer choice has implications we don't see. The global economy is designed to insulate us from those implications, to make the suffering invisible. Investigative journalism makes it visible again.
We'll keep covering these stories because that's what Truth Report does. We follow the money, expose the systems, and name the names. We don't pretend to be neutral because there's nothing neutral about watching corporations destroy communities while regulators look away.
If you found tonight's reporting valuable, share it. Talk about it. And most importantly, stay engaged. Democracy is a participation sport, and the other side never stops playing.
For Truth Report, I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. We'll see you next time, assuming they haven't shut us down yet.
That was a joke. Mostly. Good night, everyone.